For more than half a century, the word Godfather has been inseparable from the image of Michael Corleone, a calm, calculating figure who turns family loyalty into absolute power, who speaks softly while destinies collapse around him, who embodies the idea that control is more powerful than violence. Hollywood taught the world that this is what ultimate mafia authority looks like: cold, strategic, almost elegant. But what if that image was never the truth, only a carefully crafted myth? Far from the movie screen, in the real streets of New York, another man ruled with none of the drama, none of the speeches, and none of the cinematic bloodshed. His name was Carlo Gambino. And unlike Michael Corleone, he never needed the spotlight to dominate an entire criminal universe. No iconic quotes, no public trials, no legendary showdowns, just decades of uninterrupted control over one of the most powerful crime families in American history. This is where the myth fractures. Because while Michael Corleone is remembered for the enemies he destroyed, Carlo Gambino is feared for something far more unsettling: the enemies he never had to confront at all. He didn't win through spectacle. He won through silence, patience, and systems designed to survive without him. And that raises the question Hollywood never wanted to ask. Did the real Godfather ever need violence to rule? This video is not about a movie character. It's about the man who perfected power without being seen, who built an empire that outlived him, and who may have inspired the legend yet remained deliberately erased from public memory. Because in the real world, the most dangerous figures aren't the ones everyone talks about. They're the ones no one ever notices. So, who was the true Godfather of America, and why was he never on screen? The rise of Michael Corleone begins with hesitation. He is introduced as an outsider, a war veteran who wants nothing to do with the criminal world that feeds his family's wealth. His power is forged through trauma, betrayal, and a series of violent turning points that force him to abandon morality in exchange for control. Hollywood frames this transformation as tragic and inevitable. A good man corrupted by circumstance, stepping into darkness because fate leaves him no alternative. Power in this version is something seized during moments of crisis. The rise of Carlo Gambino could not be more different. There is no dramatic turning point, no single moment of descent. Born in Sicily and raised inside a culture where organized crime was not a choice but an environment, Gambino never needed to transform into a gangster. He was shaped by the system from the beginning. By the time he arrived in the United States, power was not something he chased. It was something he cultivated slowly, through loyalty, kinship, and an instinctive understanding of hierarchy. While Michael Corleone's ascent is built on decisive acts of violence that announce his authority, Carlo Gambino's early years are defined by the opposite approach. He learned quickly that visibility was weakness. Instead of drawing attention, he positioned himself behind stronger personalities, allowing others to fight, fall, and expose themselves. Every arrest, every public feud, every headline was a lesson, and Gambino was paying attention. This difference reveals the first major fault line between fiction and reality. Michael Corleone becomes powerful by proving he is willing to kill. Carlo Gambino becomes powerful by proving he never needs to. One earns fear through action. The other earns obedience through predictability and restraint. In the real underworld, stability is currency, and Gambino understood this earlier than anyone else around him. By the time Michael Corleone formally assumes leadership, the audience already knows his name, his face, his reputation. By contrast, when Carlo Gambino began consolidating real influence in New York, most people, even inside law enforcement, barely knew who he was. And that was not an accident. It was strategy. From the very beginning, these two paths reveal a brutal truth. Cinematic power is loud, but real power is patient. One is designed to be remembered, the other is designed to last. In The Godfather, power is proven through violence. When Michael Corleone takes control, the message is unmistakable. Authority is established by eliminating enemies in decisive, unforgettable moments. Assassinations happen in public places, rivals disappear overnight, and fear spreads fast. The audience is taught to believe that this is how mafia power works. Strike hard, strike visibly, and let the message travel on its own. But the real world operated by a different logic. Carlo Gambino understood something far more dangerous. Blood on the streets attracts attention, and attention invites destruction. Instead of ruling through spectacle, Gambino ruled through control of infrastructure. He focused on industries that never make headlines but quietly decide how cities function: construction, trucking, garment unions, ports, and waste management. These were not glamorous domains, but they were worth hundreds of millions of dollars every year, and they touched nearly every major business in New York City. While other crime bosses fought wars over territory, Gambino made violence unnecessary by controlling access. If a company wanted materials delivered, labor approved, or goods moved through the docks, permission flowed through networks he influenced. No gunshots were required, only silence and denial. Businesses that cooperated thrived. Those that didn't found themselves stalled, isolated, or quietly ruined. The genius of this system was that no crime scene ever pointed back to him. This stands in stark contrast to Michael Corleone's world, where violence is a tool to reset the balance of power. In cinema, fear is immediate and emotional. In reality, Gambino's fear was structural. People didn't fear what he might do to them tomorrow, they feared what would stop working if they crossed him today. And that kind of fear doesn't fade. It embeds itself into routine. By the 1,960 seconds and early 1,970 seconds, Gambino's approach had produced something unprecedented. A mafia empire that appeared stable, boring, almost invisible. Law enforcement agencies were trained to chase bodies, weapons, and dramatic conspiracies. What they struggled to dismantle were contracts, union votes, and quiet agreements enforced without threats. Gambino turned the absence of violence into camouflage. This reveals the most uncomfortable truth Hollywood leaves out. The most powerful criminal organizations are not the loudest, they are the quietest. Michael Corleone's authority depends on moments of terror. Carlo Gambino's authority depended on making terror unnecessary. And that is why one became a legend on screen, while the other ruled the real world almost unnoticed. So which form of power is more absolute, the one that kills to be feared, or the one that never needs to? If violence was the language of cinema, invisibility was the language of real power. This is where the gap between Michael Corleone and Carlo Gambino becomes impossible to ignore. Michael's authority, no matter how controlled, is always visible. His decisions ripple outward through dramatic confrontations, whispered threats, and unmistakable consequences. The story needs him to be seen, because visibility is how fiction confirms power. Gambino understood the opposite truth. The moment power becomes visible, it becomes vulnerable. He avoided interviews, cameras, wiretaps, and even internal displays of dominance. He did not rule from a throne. He ruled from the background, letting others appear important while he remained structurally indispensable. To most of the public, he was not a legend or a villain, he was barely a name. And that anonymity was deliberate. While other bosses craved recognition inside the underworld, Gambino cultivated something far more effective: plausible obscurity. He kept his lifestyle modest, avoided sudden wealth displays, and rarely put himself at the center of disputes. When conflicts arose, intermediaries handled them. When decisions were made, they appeared to come from committees or consensus. Responsibility was always diffused, and traceability was always broken. This strategy created a dangerous illusion for law enforcement. Investigators searched for kingpins who behaved like Michael Corleone, commanding, decisive, unmistakable. What they found instead were fragments: union leaders, business owners, brokers, relatives, and quiet enforcers who never pointed upward. Gambino did not need to intimidate the system. He blended into it. And systems protect what they cannot isolate. Michael Corleone's world depends on personal authority. When he enters a room, everyone knows who he is. Gambino's world worked best when no one knew who was ultimately in charge, only that things functioned smoothly when certain expectations were met. This is the difference between commanding fear and engineering dependence. Fear provokes resistance. Dependence creates compliance. By turning invisibility into policy, Gambino achieved something rare in organized crime: longevity without escalation. He didn't need to expand aggressively or prove dominance through spectacle. His power grew precisely because it appeared static. In a city defined by ambition and conflict, stability became his signature weapon. This leads to a disturbing conclusion. Michael Corleone is powerful because people recognize him. Carlo Gambino was powerful because people didn't. One controls outcomes through presence. The other controls outcomes through absence. And in the real world, absence is often far more difficult to fight. When power leaves no fingerprints, who can ever be held accountable? In fiction, power collapses when the man at the center disappears. The world of Michael Corleone is built around personality, his judgment, his presence, his authority. Remove him, and the structure begins to crack. Loyalty weakens, rivals test boundaries, and succession becomes a question of strength rather than continuity. Hollywood treats this as inevitable. When the king falls, chaos follows. The real-world legacy of Carlo Gambino tells a far more unsettling story. When Gambino died in 1976, there was no visible collapse, no public panic, no violent scramble for power. The machinery he built continued to function almost seamlessly. Businesses still operated. Unions still voted the same way. Money still moved through the same quiet channels. To outsiders, nothing appeared to change, and that was the point. Gambino did not design his empire to glorify himself. He designed it to outlive him. Leadership roles were distributed, responsibilities fragmented, and authority embedded inside routines rather than personalities. This made the organization resilient in a way that cinematic crime families rarely are. There was no single switch to flip, no throne to seize. Even succession was treated not as a coronation, but as maintenance. This system proved especially powerful as U.S. law enforcement escalated its war against organized crime. Agencies like the FBI were trained to target visible hierarchies: bosses, underbosses, captains. Gambino's structure offered them no clean targets. Arrests removed individuals, but not functionality. Investigations produced names, but not leverage. The empire behaved less like a gang and more like an institution, slow, adaptive, and deeply embedded. Michael Corleone's downfall, in narrative terms, is tragic because it is personal. He loses family, trust, and ultimately control because everything flows through him. Gambino avoided that fate by ensuring that nothing depended entirely on him. His absence did not create a vacuum, it confirmed that the system had been working exactly as intended. This is where the final distinction between myth and reality becomes clear. Michael Corleone sought to secure his legacy. Carlo Gambino sought to erase his. One wanted to be remembered as powerful. The other wanted power to continue without his name attached to it. And that may be the most chilling measure of success in organized crime. Not how loudly an empire rises, but how quietly it keeps operating after its creator is gone. Hollywood did not invent the Mafia, but it reshaped how the world understands power. Through characters like Michael Corleone, cinema taught audiences to associate criminal authority with honor, family loyalty, and carefully framed violence. The Godfather turned organized crime into a tragic narrative, where every brutal decision is justified by love, survival, or destiny. Power is emotional. Power is personal. Power is dramatic. The real world could not be more different. Carlo Gambino did not rule through grand gestures or moral codes. He ruled through contracts, relationships, and predictability. There was no romance in his system, no cinematic arc. Decisions were made not to express dominance, but to avoid disruption. Violence was not a statement, it was a failure of planning. And unlike in film, failure carried consequences that attracted prosecutors, journalists, and federal agencies. Hollywood's version of the Mafia also simplifies conflict. Enemies are clear, betrayals are dramatic, outcomes are final. In reality, Gambino understood that permanent enemies are inefficient. Rivals could be absorbed, neutralized, or simply waited out. Time, not bullets, was often the most effective weapon. This slow, grinding logic does not translate well to the screen, so it was left out. The result is a powerful illusion. Viewers walk away believing that mafia power is about fear and spectacle, when in truth it is about leverage and routine. Michael Corleone commands obedience because people are afraid of what he might do. Carlo Gambino commanded obedience because people were afraid of what would quietly stop working if they crossed him. One kind of fear fades when the gun is gone. The other becomes part of daily life. This distortion matters because it hides the most dangerous truth of all. Real criminal power often looks boring. It hides behind paperwork, meetings, favors, and long-term arrangements that never make headlines. By focusing on dramatic violence, Hollywood taught the public to look in the wrong direction, and that leaves us with a final, uncomfortable question. If Michael Corleone had existed in the real world of Carlo Gambino, would his kind of power have survived at all? In the end, the comparison leads to a conclusion Hollywood never intended. Michael Corleone represents how power looks decisive, dramatic, unforgettable. His authority is built to be witnessed, to be feared in the moment, to leave a mark that the audience can clearly identify. It is powerful, but it is also fragile, because it depends on constant presence and constant reinforcement. Carlo Gambino represents how power actually works. Quiet, patient, systemic. He did not need loyalty, speeches, or symbolic executions. He needed stability, control, and time. While fictional empires rise and fall in a single generation, Gambino's influence shaped decades of American organized crime without ever demanding public recognition. His greatest achievement was not dominance, it was normalization. This is the final illusion the Godfather leaves behind. It teaches us to fear the visible tyrant, while ignoring the invisible architect. It convinces us that power announces itself, when in reality, the most durable power avoids attention entirely. Gambino understood that being remembered is not the same as being effective, so if history rarely speaks his name, that may be the clearest evidence of his success. Because the real Godfather was never meant to be admired, quoted, or immortalized on film. He was meant to operate and disappear.